Until recently, courtroom drama in the state of Kentucky was limited to what we saw on television, fiction like Perry Mason. Well, people in the legal community complained that people were getting an unreal picture of what life was really like in a courtroom. Well, that is changing now because television cameras are now allowed in the courtroom. And people who are tuning in are finding out that real television drama is an awful lot different than shows like Perry Mason.
Turn around this way. Move back. Hand to Mike.
Just not get it.
Many viewers watching the evening news back in October were startled to see Sheila Sweeney show the world how she shot and killed Patrolman Christopher Dunn. The trial of Sweeney and her accomplice, Gary Odom, was one of the first to be televised in the state after a new rule by the Kentucky Supreme Court gave judges the power to allow television and still cameras into the courtroom. Chief Justice John Palmore explains the justification behind the change.
The press has a right to be there, and the reason the press has a right to be in the courtroom is because the public has a right to know what's going on. The public owns the courts. Well, if the press can be there, I think that the cameras should be there too, because it's the same thing. The mission is the same.
Sweeney testified earlier this week that Odom had brainwashed her to protect him with a gun. Odom said Sweeney was...
In this state, one camera and one operator are permitted in the courtroom. Right now, the court is in recess and the camera is being used for a live report.
It is ordered and adjudged by the court that the defendant, Gary DeWitt Odom, is guilty of the offense of murder, a capital offense.
When court is in session, the reporters watch the trial on a TV in a room across the hall from the court. In this state, the press has worked long and hard to win access for cameras, and today the reporters are keenly aware that their behavior is now also on trial. There is also general agreement among the press that although this may still not be the ideal situation, it is far better than coverage without cameras.
It's a lot easier to sit back here and listen off of this monitor on what's going on because we can hear things. And when you're sitting in the courtroom, sometimes because of the spaciousness of the courtroom, you can't hear everything that's going on, and there are microphones around the courtroom. We can hear things. As a matter of fact, some newspaper reporters have even sat back here with us because they can hear what's coming off this monitor easier than sitting in the courtroom.
That has its bad effects also because I can't get the feel of what's going on in the courtroom. I also can't see everybody's reaction. I have one camera. I'd like to have it where we had 3 cameras in a courtroom. Of course, that's not possible. I'm glad we've got one. But you really can't get the feel of what is going on out there. But I'm glad we've got a camera in a courtroom because we've got better coverage. The public is better informed about what goes on in a courtroom.
Those who actually participated in this particular trial, from the Commonwealth attorney to Sheila Sweeney's defense attorney to the judge himself, all agree that the televising of this particular trial went smoothly.
Personally, it is a far more acceptable procedure than what I had anticipated.
It's just like as if you have a courtroom that's loaded with people. It's a little different at first when you walk in there than when you have no spectators at all. But once you get accustomed, it takes a few minutes, 5 or 10 or 20 minutes or so, depending upon the type of case it is, then you completely forget about it.
The only people we're concerned about the courtroom are those 12 in the jury box and the judge. And if you ignore one of those two in deference to a box with a lens on it, you're going to be in trouble.
At no time did I see anyone playing to the camera.
Louisville attorney Joseph Glass has faced the Supreme Court of this land, but he's never faced a TV camera in a courtroom. Nonetheless, he has some very serious reservations, which place him at odds with most of those we have already heard from.
My major objection really involves the influencing factor that camera can have on the participants in a trial, and that includes the court, the judge, the lawyers in the case, the witnesses in the case, and the jury, if there's a jury.
They objected to what they thought was going to be noise, confusion, lights going off and on, large tapes running through the courtroom and people falling over them, all kind of movement around and distraction generally. None of that has proven true. Just the opposite. It was my experience in the Odom trial that no one knew that the camera was in the courtroom.
What about that one witness or 2 witnesses that become reticent because of that camera? They don't know whether it's on or it's off. It scares them to death. They're scared anyway being in court.
Supreme Court Justice Robert Stevens believes the state's rule does address the important issue of witness rights.
They were concerned, for example, about the rights of witnesses, but the rule is couched in such phrases that that's taken care of. If there's a problem about a rape victim testifying, the judge can and does, I guess, order the camera not be focused on her at that time.
It is always a matter of sadness to me to be faced with the responsibility of sentencing young people to confinement in the penitentiary.
Most of those we spoke with in the legal community, including proponents, felt that the jury was still out on the important question of how accurately the hours of tape will be edited into short news stories.
What do you as media people do with 6 days of tapes? Because whatever you pick and choose to show the general public may or may not be the critical part of the trial, and who can define what's critical. So, you know, it's kind of a two-pronged argument, because you could say we're trying to demystify it, but unless you show that whole trial and set it aside and run a series or run a special or whatever, you're not doing it, are you?
This thing may last 8 hours a day. We have to do a story in a minute 30 or a minute 45 seconds. We have to pick out what we think are the most important parts of a trial. Now, if that happens to be something that is sensational, and that's exactly what happened in the trial, but we try to be fair and we try to pick out what is important.
This Florida trial demonstrated the awesome impact a televised trial can have on a community. 4 white policemen were charged with killing a black man named Arthur McDuffie during an arrest.
Whitaker said McDuffie's motorcycle was not involved in an accident. The minor rips and tears in McDuffie's clothing were inconsistent with damage caused by an accident. The state is expected to end its case here tomorrow with Dade Medical Examiner Dr. Ronald Wright. Frank Lynn, Channel 4 News, Tampa.
Many people believe that the news stories which followed the all-white jury's not guilty verdict, complete with footage of the grieving mother, actually sparked the 1980 Miami riots.
Fires were set all along several blocks of 27th Avenue. Businesses were looted.
Televised trials elsewhere in Florida didn't have such an explosive impact. This trial, the first to be shown in its entirety, and many others like it around the state, were carefully studied, and resulting recommendations served as the model for Kentucky's rule.
I think the rule is an excellent one. It was not something that we pulled out of a hat. It came from the Florida rule. There was a very controlled experiment with an extensive survey. All the legal ramifications were looked into it by the Chief Justice of that court in his opinion. And so we had a pretty good model upon which to base ours.
It's not a temporary order or a temporary rule. It's a permanent rule. It's indefinite. There are no plans at this time to come to a screeching halt anywhere down the line.
Each trial which goes smoothly, as this one did, gives further weight to the Chief Justice's opinion that it is just no big deal. And he suspects that as new courts are built, they will include special provisions to make television and newspaper coverage easier and even less obtrusive.
You know, back when automobiles were new and scared horses and threw dust up into people's houses and everything, a lot of people didn't like automobiles. But you know, they're right commonplace today. And it's just almost like moving from the old outdoor outhouse to modern plumbing. And I think in time that it's going to be just as commonplace as the automobile and modern plumbing.